A shattered Rolex Daytona clattered onto the harsh linoleum, ignored by the men in ruined Brioni suits who dragged him into the emergency room. He didn't scream or thrash. He simply locked his dark, heavy-lidded eyes on the nearest nurse, communicating a silent, terrifying ultimatum. Fix me, or else. The relentless hum of the fluorescent lights in Northwestern Memorial's emergency department was a sound Lily Hayes had long learned to tune out. At 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, the city of Chicago usually offered a brief, merciful lull. Lily stood at the nurse's station, a lukewarm cup of bitter cafeteria coffee in one hand, her tired eyes scanning the glowing interface of the hospital's epic charting system. She was 28, pragmatically dressed in navy blue Cherokee scrubs, her ash-blonde hair pulled into a severe, no-nonsense bun. She had survived 3 years in the ER. She thought she had seen the worst the city had to offer. Then the automatic doors slid open, and the quiet of the night shattered. There was no ambulance siren, no frantic paramedic shouting vitals. Instead, a matte black Cadillac Escalade had parked illegally on the ambulance ramp, its hazard lights flashing rhythmically in the damp Chicago fog. 3 men burst through the sliding glass doors. 2 of them were built like freight trains, wearing dark, expensive tailoring that was starkly out of place under the harsh hospital lights. Between them, they supported a 3rd man. He was tall, leanly muscled, and dressed in a bespoke charcoal shirt that was clinging wetly to his left side. His head hung slightly, but as they muscled past the empty triage desk, he lifted his chin. "We need a room." Now, the larger of the 2 escorts barked. He didn't ask. He commanded. As he shifted his weight, Lily caught the distinct, heavy metallic bulge of a Glock 19 holstered at his hip beneath the suit jacket. Dr. Aris, a 3rd-year resident who was currently fighting a losing battle against sleep deprivation, froze near the supply closet. The security guard at the front desk was suddenly very interested in his shoelaces. Lily set her coffee down. Her training kicked in, overriding the primal instinct to back away. "Trauma Bay 2, she pointed, her voice steady and authoritative. "Get him on the bed." They hauled him into the stark, brightly lit room. Lily followed, snapping a pair of purple nitrile gloves onto her hands. "I need one of you to step back," she ordered, moving toward the patient. "We stay," the second bodyguard, a man with a jagged scar bisecting his left eyebrow, growled. "You stay out of my way," Lily retorted, not looking at him. She reached for the trauma shears resting in her scrub pocket. "If you crowd me," he bleeds out. "Your choice." For a fraction of a second, the room held its breath. Then, the man on the bed spoke. "Do as she says, Cole." His voice was a low, gravelly baritone, surprisingly calm for a man whose side was sliced wide open. It possessed a quiet resonance that instantly sucked the oxygen out of the room. Cole stepped back, his jaw tight. Lily approached the bed. "I have to cut the shirt," she said, not waiting for permission. The heavy silk parted easily under the shears. As she pulled the fabric away, she revealed a jagged, ugly laceration spanning from his lower left rib cage down toward his hip. It wasn't a gunshot wound, it was a knife strike, deep and precise. "Someone knew what they were doing," Lily murmured strictly to herself as she grabbed a stack of sterile gauze and pressed down hard on the wound to staunch the flow. The man beneath her hands didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He just watched her. Lily dared to meet his eyes. They were a striking, piercing gray, like the slate sky over Lake Michigan before a winter storm. His face was sharp, aristocratic, framed by dark hair damp with sweat. He was arguably the most beautiful man she had ever seen, but the sheer, unadulterated danger radiating from him neutralized any conventional attraction. "What's your name?" Lily asked, shifting her weight to maintain pressure while she used her free foot to pull a mayo stand closer. "John," he answered. "Just John." "All right, John. I'm Lily. I need to clean this out and see how deep it goes. It's going to burn." She grabbed a bottle of betadine and a fresh pack of sponges. "I've had worse," John murmured. His gray eyes tracked her every movement, analyzing her efficiency. He noticed how her hands didn't shake. He noticed the lack of a wedding ring. He noticed that she wasn't looking at the sprawling, intricate tattoo of a two-headed eagle that covered his left pectoral, a very specific, highly recognized insignia in the criminal underworld that usually made grown men cross the street. She was treating him like a mechanical engine that needed a tune-up. Dr. Aris finally edged into the room, his face pale. I can take over, Nurse Hayes. John didn't even look at the doctor. The nurse does it. Aris swallowed hard, looking at the two armed men flanking the door. Right. I'll just order the lidocaine. He practically fled. You have a terrifying bedside manner, Lily noted dryly, swapping the soaked gauze for fresh ones. The corner of John's mouth twitched upward. I prefer efficiency over pleasantries. Good, because you're not getting any. Lily prepped the local anesthetic. Little pinch here. She injected the lidocaine around the margins of the wound. John's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. But he remained impossibly still. For the next 20 minutes, Trauma Bay 2 was enveloped in a suffocating, heavy silence, broken only by the metallic snip of instruments and Lily's steady breathing. She worked meticulously, irrigating the muscle tissue, tying off a small, severed vessel, and beginning the process of closing the deep dermal layers with absorbable sutures. You're very quiet, John observed. The proximity was intimate. Her face was mere inches from his chest as she concentrated on the intricate needlework. She smelled of institutional soap and a faint hint of vanilla. I don't chat when I sew. It makes the stitches crooked, Lily replied, selecting a 4-0 Prolene suture for the external closure. Though I suppose you're lucky. Half an inch deeper, and this would have nicked your spleen. You wouldn't be sitting here staring at me. You'd be unconscious in an oar. Luck had nothing to do with it, John said softly. I turned. Lily paused, her needle hovering over his skin. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the hardened calculation in his gaze. He hadn't just been attacked. He had engaged, analyzed the blade's trajectory, and minimized the damage in a fraction of a second. A cold shiver ghosted down her spine. She quickly resumed her work, pulling the nylon thread taut. By the time she tied the final knot and applied the steri-strips, her back ached. Keep it dry, you need antibiotics. And you need to come back in 10 days to get these removed. Not that I expect you to actually walk through the front doors again. John sat up slowly, the movement clearly agonizing, but he masked it behind a wall of pure willpower. Cole immediately stepped forward, draping a heavy cashmere overcoat over John's bare shoulders. We're leaving, John announced. You haven't been discharged. You haven't even been registered, Lily protested, stepping in front of the door out of sheer reflex. Cole's hand drifted toward his jacket lapel. John raised a hand, stopping his man. He looked down at Lily. The height difference was significant. She had to crane her neck to maintain eye contact. I don't exist on paper, Lily. And tonight, neither does this. From his coat pocket, John retrieved a thick, banded stack of $100 bills. He tossed it onto the stainless steel counter beside the sink. For the hospital's trouble, and for yours. I don't take bribes, Lily said, her voice dropping, indignation sparking in her chest. It's not a bribe. It's a donation, John corrected smoothly. He stepped closer. The scent of ozone, expensive cologne, and iron washed over her. You have steady hands, Lily. I value steady hands. Before she could form a response, he swept past her, his men forming an impenetrable wedge around him as they marched out of the ER. Lily stood frozen in the trauma bay, the echoes of their footsteps fading into the chaotic beep of the monitors. She looked at the perfectly spaced, dark blue stitches on the discarded surgical drape, then at the impossible stack of cash on the counter. A profound sense of unease settled in her stomach. She had stitched up gangbangers, drunk drivers, and victims of violent crimes. But John was different. He wasn't part of the chaos. He was the one who orchestrated it. And for a terrifying moment, she felt like a fly that had just unknowingly landed on a spider's web. The sun over Chicago was an anemic pale yellow, struggling to pierce the thick layer of smog and low-hanging clouds. In a sprawling, tri-level penthouse overlooking Astor Street, the silence was absolute. John Mercer sat in a leather wingback chair in his study, a glass of Macallan 18 resting untouched on the mahogany side table. He was shirtless, the heavy overcoat discarded on the sofa. He stared down at his left side. The laceration was a brutal, angry red line, but the suturing was a work of art. The stitches were meticulously even, the tension perfect. There was no puckering of the skin. It was the work of a perfectionist. The pain was a dull, persistent throbbing, a reminder of the ambush at the docks. The Russian syndicate had grown bold. Attempting to intercept a shipment of untraceable microchips, his organization was moving through the port of Chicago. They had failed. The man who had held the knife was currently resting at the bottom of the Calumet River, securely chained to a cinder block. But John wasn't thinking about the Russians. He was thinking about her. Lily. In John's world, people reacted to him in one of three ways: with cloying sycophancy, paralyzing fear, or violent opposition. Lily had exhibited none of these. She had looked at the gun on Cole's hip, recognized the danger, and consciously chosen to ignore it to do her job. She had touched him without hesitation, her fingers cool and clinical against his heated skin. She had met his gaze and refused to look away. It wasn't just bravery. It was a fundamental detachment from the terror he naturally inspired. To John, who controlled his empire through intimidation and meticulously curated fear, her indifference was a puzzle, an intoxicating, maddening puzzle. The heavy oak doors of the study opened silently. Declan stepped into the room. Declan was John's shadow, his chief enforcer and intelligence gatherer. He possessed the polished look of a LaSalle Street hedge fund manager, masking the instincts of an apex predator. "The perimeter is secure," Declan reported, handing John a secure, encrypted tablet. "The Port Authority cameras have been wiped. The escalation with the Volkov family is being handled. They're pulling their soldiers back." John barely glanced at the tablet. "Did you secure the hospital footage?" Declan paused, a flicker of surprise breaking his usually stoic facade. "Northwestern?" "Yes. Erased the internal feeds for the hour we were there. The ER staff won't talk. We dropped 50 grand into their anonymous pediatric donation fund this morning. It buys their collective amnesia." "Good." John leaned back, a sharp inhale hissing through his teeth as the stitches pulled taut. He reached out and traced the edge of the medical tape. "You need to rest, boss," Declan advised, his tone carefully neutral. "Dr. Rossi can be here in an hour to check the work." "No." John's voice was hard. "The work is flawless." Declan frowned slightly, but knew better than to argue. He stood waiting, recognizing the dangerous, contemplative look in John's gray eyes. It was the look John got before he executed a hostile takeover, before he dismantled an enemy's life piece by piece. "The nurse," John said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Lily, the blonde in the ER?" Declan asked, his mental gears shifting rapidly. "Did she see something she shouldn't have? Did she take something?" "She saw exactly what she was supposed to see," John murmured, picking up his glass of scotch and swirling the amber liquid. He watched the light catch the crystal, but she didn't react. "She saw the ink, Declan. She saw the guns. She didn't miss a beat. She's a trauma nurse in Chicago, John. They see bullet holes and gang signs before their morning coffee. Not like this." John took a slow sip of the whiskey, letting the burn coat his throat. He remembered the faint scent of vanilla, the stern line of her mouth when she told him off, the way her eyes, which he now recalled were a striking hazel, had flared with indignation when he offered her money. She couldn't be bought, and she wouldn't be bullied. In John's world, anomalies were either eliminated or acquired. Lily was a glaring, fascinating anomaly. He set the glass down with a definitive clack against the wood. "Finn here." Declan went utterly still. "Find her? John, with all due respect, we are currently at war with the Volkovs. The feds have a wiretap operation running out of the south side we're trying to dodge. Are you sure bringing a civilian?" "I didn't ask for an operational risk assessment, Declan," John interrupted, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register that commanded absolute obedience. "I gave you an order. Find her. I want a complete dossier. Where she lives, where she gets her coffee, who her family is, her financial standing, everything. I want to know her better than she knows herself." Declan nodded curtly. "Consider it done." Declan retreated from the study, pulling his phone from his pocket before the doors even clicked shut. He dialed a scrambled number, connecting to their cyber division operating out of a heavily fortified server farm in the West Loop. "I need an extraction," Declan said into the receiver as he walked down the expansive marble hallway. Target is a registered nurse at Northwestern Memorial. First name Lily. Worked the ER graveyard shift last night. Hacked the hospital's Epic employee database. Cross-reference with state licensing boards. I want a name, an address, and a full background check on my desk in 20 minutes. Across the city, in a cramped second-floor apartment in Logan Square, the world was blissfully ignorant of the machinery John Mercer had just set in motion. Lily Hayes unlocked her deadbolt, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. The morning light was filtering through the cheap Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across her faded area rug. She dropped her keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, kicked off her white nursing clogs, and collapsed onto her small, overstuffed sofa. She rubbed her temples, trying to banish the lingering adrenaline of the shift. The image of the man John kept flashing behind her closed eyelids. The chilling calmness in his gray eyes, the brutal reality of the violence scarred into his skin. "Just another night," she whispered to herself, wrapping a throw blanket around her shoulders. She reached for the TV remote, needing the mindless chatter of a morning news broadcast to drown out her thoughts. She tried to convince herself that John was just a ghost of the night shift, a dangerous phantom who had drifted into her life for 20 minutes and vanished back into the shadows where he belonged. She had no idea that at that exact moment, a high-speed printer in an Astor Street penthouse was spitting out a high-resolution copy of her driver's license photo, her social security number, and the exact coordinates of her apartment. The ghost wasn't gone. He had merely found her scent. 3 days passed. The rain over Chicago finally broke, leaving behind a biting, bitter wind that whipped off Lake Michigan. For Lily Hayes, the ghost of the trauma bay, had faded into the background of her grueling 70-hour work week. It started on a Thursday morning at the Intelligentsia coffee shop off Logan Boulevard. Lily was waiting for her usual oat milk latte, scrolling through a mountain of unread emails. When she reached the counter to pay, the barista, a college student named Toby, who usually complained to her about his midterms, handed her the cup with a tight, nervous smile. "It's covered, Lily," Toby said, his eyes darting toward the front window. Lily frowned, pulling out her debit card. "What do you mean? Did I leave a tab?" "No. The gentleman outside took care of it. Said to tell you to have a good shift." Lily spun around. Parked directly outside the large glass windows, taking up 2-metered spaces, was a matte black Cadillac Escalade with deeply tinted windows. It was the exact same vehicle that had idled on the ambulance ramp 3 nights ago. A chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago wind settled in her chest. She watched as the heavy SUV smoothly pulled away, disappearing into the morning traffic. By the time she arrived at Northwestern Memorial for her day shift, her nerves were completely frayed. She badge swiped into the locker room, but before she could even change into her scrubs, the overhead intercom cracked. "Lily Hayes, please report to the Chief of Nursing Administration." Lily Hayes to administration. Lily froze, her locker door half open. She had never been called to Brenda Walsh's office in her 3 years at the hospital. Brenda was a notoriously tough administrator who only summoned staff for severe disciplinary actions or major promotions. 10 minutes later, Lily sat in a stiff leather chair opposite Brenda's massive oak desk. "Nurse Hayes," Brenda began, her expression unreadable behind thick-rimmed glasses. She folded her hands over a pristine manila folder. "I'll get straight to the point. The hospital has received an unprecedented, anonymous philanthropic donation this morning. 8 figures. It's enough to completely renovate the pediatric oncology wing." "That's wonderful, ma'am," Lily said cautiously, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Yes, it is," Brenda agreed, though her tone lacked any warmth. However, the donation came with a single, highly unusual stipulation. The benefactor requires private, round-the-clock medical retainer services. And they have requested you, specifically, for the position. Lily's breath hitched. Me? I don't do private concierge nursing. I'm an ER trauma specialist. You are whatever the hospital needs you to be when a donor of this magnitude makes a request, Brenda countered sharply. She slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was a contract. The salary printed at the bottom made Lily's eyes widen. It was more than she would make in 10 years of double shifts. I decline, Lily said immediately, pushing the paper back. I am not comfortable with this. Brenda let out a heavy sigh, removing her glasses. Lily, you don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. This isn't just about the hospital. The benefactor's legal team contacted us with other details. They are aware of the $90,000 balance on your Navient student loans. They are aware of your mother's mounting physical therapy bills in Ohio. If you sign this, all of that debt is erased by close of business today. Lily felt the blood drain from her face. It was a flawless, terrifying trap. John Mercer hadn't just found her. He had meticulously dismantled the financial cage she had spent her entire adult life trying to climb out of, only to replace it with a gilded cage of his own making. And if I refuse? Lily asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and pure, unadulterated rage. If you refuse, the donation is pulled. The pediatric wing stays as it is. And, Brenda looked genuinely sympathetic for a fleeting second, I have been instructed by the board of directors to terminate your employment at Northwestern Memorial, effective immediately, for failure to comply with administrative directives. Lily stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. They can't do that. That's illegal. In a city run by money and influence, Lily, legality is entirely subjective, Brenda said quietly. You have 24 hours to report to the address in that folder. I suggest you pack a bag. Lily didn't take the folder. She already knew who had sent it. She stormed out of the administrative wing, her hands shaking with a violent fury. She wasn't a pawn to be moved across a chessboard by a criminal with a god complex. If John Mercer wanted to buy her life, he was going to have to look her in the eye while she told him to go to hell. The Astor Street penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a restored 1920s high-rise in the Gold Coast neighborhood. Lily stepped out of the private elevator, her jaw set, her fists clenched inside the pockets of her inexpensive trench coat. The sheer opulence of the foyer, imported Italian marble, original modern art, and a sweeping view of the Chicago skyline felt like an insult. Declan was waiting for her. He looked her up and down, noting the absence of luggage. Miss Hayes. John is in his study. Follow me. I know the way out, thanks, Lily snapped, marching past him down the wide corridor. She pushed open the heavy double doors to the study without knocking. John was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, dressed in a crisp white dress shirt and dark trousers, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked entirely healed, the dangerous aura around him magnified by the daylight. He ended the call as she entered, turning to face her. His slate-gray eyes swept over her flushed face, and the ghost of a smirk played on his lips. You didn't bring your bags. Call off your lawyers. Call off your dogs, Lily demanded, closing the distance between them. She pointed a finger at his chest, right where she had stitched him together. You do not own me. You cannot buy my employer. You cannot pay off my debts, and you certainly cannot force me into your life. I believe I just did all three, John replied, his voice a low, soothing rumble that infuriated her further. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, the scent of bergamot and danger wrapped around her. You're drowning in debt, Lily. You work yourself to the bone for a system that would replace you in an hour if you drop dead. I offered you a way out. You offered me a collar, Lily yelled, refusing to back down, even as her instincts screamed at her to run from the predator in the room. I saved your life because it was my job. I don't want your money, and I don't want any part of whatever violent, psychotic world you run. Tell Brenda I quit. She turned on her heel to leave. John reached out, his hand wrapping around her wrist. His grip was entirely inescapable, yet shockingly gentle. Lily, crack. The sound was deafening, a high-velocity whip crack that shattered the tranquility of the room. Before Lily could comprehend what was happening, the reinforced bullet-resistant glass of the penthouse window spider webbed violently. A second crack followed instantly, and the glass gave way, raining down on the Persian rug like lethal hail. John didn't hesitate. His reflexes were horrifyingly fast. He yanked Lily hard by the wrist, pulling her off her feet. He threw his body over hers, taking them both to the floor behind the massive, solid oak desk, just as a third round tore through the leather wingback chair where he had been standing seconds before. "Declan!" John roared, the calmness entirely vanished, replaced by the booming, authoritative shout of a warlord under siege. The study doors burst open. Declan dove into the room, a suppressed Sig Sauer already drawn, laying down blind covering fire toward the shattered window. "Sniper! High angle! Likely the roof of the Drake Hotel," Declan shouted over the noise. Lily was hyperventilating, her face pressed against the thick carpet, John's heavy, muscular frame pinning her down, shielding her entirely. His heart was hammering against her back. "Are you hit?" John demanded, his face inches from her ear. "No," Lily gasped, her medical training struggling to fight through the sheer panic of a live firefight. "No, I'm okay." "Stay down," he ordered. He shifted his weight off her, pulling a sleek matte black handgun from an ankle holster. He moved, with a terrifying, predatory grace, crawling toward the edge of the desk. "They missed the primary target," Declan reported, crouching by a marble pillar, analyzing the trajectory of the bullet holes in the drywall. "Volkov's men. They must have tracked her to confirm you were here." Lily's blood ran cold. Tracked her. John looked back at her, his eyes dark and volatile. The realization hit Lily like a physical blow. By forcing her to the penthouse, by publicly pulling strings at her hospital, John had inadvertently painted a massive target on her back. To the Russian syndicate, she wasn't just a nurse anymore. She was a glaring vulnerability, an asset belonging to John Mercer. "We need to move to the safe room," John commanded. He reached out, grabbing Lily by the collar of her coat and hauling her to her feet, keeping her low. "Move!" They scrambled out of the study, the sharp crunch of broken glass echoing under their shoes. Declan covered their retreat, his eyes scanning the skyline through the ruined window. John dragged Lily down a secondary windowless hallway, pressing his palm against a biometric scanner disguised as a blank wall panel. The wall slid open, revealing a steel-reinforced panic room, equipped with medical supplies, weapons, and a bank of security monitors. He shoved her inside and hit the lock mechanism. The heavy steel door sealed shut with a final, echoing thud, plunging them into a tense, artificial silence. Lily backed away from him until her shoulders hit the cold steel wall. She was trembling violently now, the adrenaline crash imminent. She looked at John. He was calmly checking the magazine of his weapon, the violence of the last 60 seconds, completely normalized in his eyes. "You," Lily breathed, her voice cracking. "You did this." "They followed me." John looked up, his expression unreadable. "Yes, they did. I'm going to die because you couldn't handle the fact that I didn't care about you," she whispered, tears of raw terror and frustration finally spilling over her lashes. John crossed the small room. He didn't touch her, but he stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "No one is going to touch you, Lily," John said, his voice a lethal, vibrating promise that sent a shiver straight to her core. "You walked into my world the second you put a needle in my chest. You just didn't realize it until today. You can't go back to your apartment. You can't go back to the hospital." He leaned in, his gray eyes locking onto hers with a possessive intensity that eclipsed the fear of the snipers outside. "You belong to me now, and I protect what is mine." The heavy steel walls of the panic room hummed with the vibration of the chaos outside. John's delilition hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "You belong to me." Under normal circumstances, a civilian would have crumpled. But as Lily stood with her back against the cold metal, staring into the slate-gray eyes of Chicago's most feared syndicate boss, the trembling in her hands abruptly stopped. The sheer, suffocating terror that had gripped her in the study evaporated, replaced by an old, deeply buried instinct. The terrified ER nurse was gone. The mask was off. Lily let out a low, humorless laugh that sounded like cracking ice. I don't belong to anyone, John. And if you think you're the most dangerous thing I've ever faced, your intelligence network is severely lacking. Before John could react to the sudden, chilling shift in her demeanor, the secure comms panel on the wall crackled to life. Declan's voice cut through the static, breathless and tight. Boss, the perimeter breach wasn't external. It's an inside job. They bypassed the biometric locks on the private elevator. We've got a 6-man tactical team moving through the penthouse. They aren't Volkov's men. John cursed violently, spinning toward the bank of high-definition security monitors. He punched a code into the keypad, bringing up the live feeds from the hallways. 6 men dressed in unmarked, heavy Kevlar tactical gear were advancing methodically toward the study, their weapons drawn. Lily stepped up beside him, her hazel eyes scanning the monitors with an unnerving, analytical coldness. She watched the point man signal with a sharp, precise hand gesture, directing 2 men to flank the reinforced doors. Declan is right. They aren't Russian syndicate, Lily stated, her voice deadpan and professional. She pointed a slender finger at the screen. Look at their footwork, heel to toe, keeping their silhouettes small to minimize the target area. They're sweeping the blind spots using a modified close-quarters breach tactic. Volkov's street soldiers use raw force and AK-47s. These are highly trained operators. Specifically, they're moving like Vanguard security personnel. John slowly turned his head to stare at her. The arrogance had vanished from his face, replaced by profound shock. How the hell does a civilian trauma nurse know about Vanguard tactical formations? Lily met his gaze without flinching. Because before I was drowning in student debt for a nursing degree to build a bulletproof cover identity, I was the premier cleaner for the Irish mob. My real name isn't Lily Hayes. It's Lily Callahan. My father, Thomas Callahan, ran the South Side before your father's syndicate wiped ours off the map 10 years ago. I learned how to dig hollow-point bullets out of men's chests when I was 14. John was utterly speechless. Thomas Callahan had been a legend, a ruthless tactician who had supposedly sent his only daughter to Europe before he was assassinated. She hadn't run to Europe. She had hidden in plain sight, washing the blood off her hands in a sterilized hospital, playing the role of an overworked, invisible nurse. You didn't just bring the Russians down on me, John, Lily whispered fiercely. You blew a 10-year cover, and worse, you brought a traitor into your own house. She reached past a stunned John and tapped the screen, zooming in on the tactical team's leader as he removed his ballistic mask to wipe the sweat from his face. It was Cole, the bodyguard with the jagged scar from the hospital. He sold you out, Lily said clinically. He knew the layout, he knew the security blind spots, and he knows exactly where this panic room is. A dark, lethal fury ignited in John's eyes. The betrayal of his own man was a death sentence, but beneath the rage, a profound, consuming fascination was taking root. He had dragged a lamb into his lion's den, only to discover she was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Suddenly, a blinding shower of orange sparks erupted from the center of the heavy steel door. Thermal lance, Lily identified immediately, backing away from the heat. It burns at 4,000 degrees. They'll cut through the locking mechanism in less than 2 minutes. John didn't waste a second. He moved to the hidden armory rack, bolted to the far wall. He grabbed a matte black SIG MCX assault rifle and slammed a magazine home. Without a word, he tossed a sleek Glock 19 and a spare tactical vest toward Lily. She caught the weapon midair, checked the chamber with a practiced fluid ease that made John's pulse spike, and snapped the vest over her scrubs. Declan, John spoke into the comms, his voice a low, terrifying growl. Cole is the mole. He's breaching the safe room. Flank them from the west corridor. On my mark. Copy that. Moving into position. The sparks from the door grew violently bright. The steel groaned, the metal turning a glowing, superheated white. Lily took her position on the left side of the door, pressing her back against the wall to avoid the fatal funnel of the doorway. John mirrored her on the right. When the door drops, they'll throw a flashbang. Lily anticipated, her breathing perfectly controlled. Close your eyes, open your mouth to equalize the pressure. Then we drop them. John looked at her over the barrel of his rifle. In the dim, flashing emergency lights of the panic room, she looked breathtakingly dangerous. She was no longer just the woman who had stitched his wounds. She was his equal. "Understood, Callahan," John murmured, the name sounding like a dark promise on his lips. With a deafening crunch, the locking bolts gave way. The heavy steel door crashed outward onto the marble floor of the hallway. A silver canister bounced into the room. Lily and John squeezed their eyes shut and braced. The flashbang detonated with an ear-splitting crack, sucking the oxygen from the air and blinding the immediate area in a strobe of white light. Before the smoke could even clear, Lily pivoted around the doorframe. She didn't hesitate. She fired 3 suppressed rhythmic shots. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The point man dropped instantly, his armor useless against the precise strikes to the unprotected junction of his neck and shoulder. John stepped out from the right, his rifle barking in short, controlled bursts. He dropped 2 more of the vanguard mercenaries before they could even level their weapons. Declan's suppressing fire from the far end of the hall caught the remaining men in a brutal crossfire. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The smoke alarm wailed through the ruined penthouse. Cole was on the floor, clutching his shattered kneecap, his weapon knocked out of reach. He looked up, his face twisted in agony, expecting to see John standing over him. Instead, Lily stepped through the smoke. She kicked his handgun out of reach with a sharp scrape across the marble. She looked down at him, her expression entirely devoid of mercy. John walked up slowly beside her, lowering his rifle. He looked at the carnage, at his traitorous right-hand man bleeding on his imported rug, and then, finally, at the woman standing beside him. She hadn't flinched. She hadn't panicked. "I underestimated you," John said. The words a rare admission of defeat, laced with a heavy, undeniable possessiveness. Lily ejected the magazine from her Glock, caught it in her palm, and finally turned to look at him. The ghost of a smirk played on her lips. "Everyone always does, John. That's exactly how I survive." He stepped into her space, ignoring the wreckage around them, his blood singing with adrenaline and something far darker and more permanent. The nurse had vanished, leaving behind the only woman in Chicago capable of standing by his side. The war with the syndicate was just beginning, but as John looked at Lily Callahan, he knew they had already won. The nurse he forced into his world turned out to be the queen he needed to rule it. Lily didn't just stitch John's wounds. She became the only person he trusted to watch his back. If you crave intense, twist-filled mafia romances, where the underestimated heroine completely flips the script on the ruthless boss, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below with your favorite moment.